Emily and James seemed like the perfect couple, a whirlwind romance, a glamorous wedding, and a life filled with promise. But beneath the polished exterior, their marriage hid a chilling secret. James wasn't the devoted husband he pretended to be. He was a seasoned predator with a sinister plan. What began as a fairy tale soon turned into a nightmare, as Emily's refusal to follow his twisted demands led to a chain of events no one could have foreseen. The truth behind their story would leave everyone questioning how well they really know the ones they love. It seemed like the ideal love story. James and Emily met in a cozy coffee shop in the heart of Chicago, where her laughter caught his attention. Emily, a wealthy businesswoman in her late 20s, was charmed by James' wit and charisma. He was a charming, ambitious man in his 30s, working in real estate. Their whirlwind romance quickly turned into a glamorous wedding, capturing the attention of Emily's social circle. To outsiders, they were the epitome of a perfect couple, Emily with her elegance and James with his magnetic personality. But what no one saw was the subtle manipulation that started almost immediately after their marriage. James was meticulous, always presenting himself as the devoted husband. Behind closed doors, though, his affection seemed calculated. He encouraged Emily to transfer parts of her estate into joint accounts and convinced her to trust him with financial matters. His promises of a secure and happy future made it hard for her to say no. James had a dark history. He had moved from city to city, leaving behind a trail of chaos. Each time he reinvented himself, blending into new lives and charming his way into unsuspecting victims' trust. This time Emily was his target. Her wealth was the final piece of a puzzle he'd been piecing together for years. At first, Emily chalked up James' mood swings to the stress of his job. He had always claimed that the real estate business was cutthroat, and she wanted to believe him. But gradually the changes became harder to ignore. He started coming home later than usual, often smelling faintly of alcohol or smoke. When Emily asked about it, he deflected her questions with vague excuses. The loving man who once prioritized their time together now barely glanced at her when she spoke. Emily's friends began noticing her growing unease. At social gatherings, she seemed distracted, her usual radiance dimmed. When one friend gently suggested that James might be hiding something, Emily brushed it off, unwilling to face the possibility. She told herself that every marriage had its ups and downs. Still, a gnawing sense of doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Meanwhile, James was carefully laying the groundwork for his next move. With Emily's wealth now firmly under his control, his interest in her had all but vanished. The once charming husband now viewed her as a burden. His frequent absences were not work-related, as he claimed, but spent with Victor, a nightclub owner deeply entrenched in illegal activities. Victor's operation was a well-oiled machine of crime, ranging from drug trafficking to a more sinister trade, human trafficking. One evening, during a casual meeting at Victor's nightclub, the conversation took a dark turn. Victor, a man with a penchant for striking deals, made an offhand comment about Emily's beauty. He joked that James had lucked out marrying such a stunning woman. To anyone else, it might have been a harmless remark, but to James it was an opportunity. He began to see Emily as a commodity, a final transaction that could rid him of his responsibilities while earning him Victor's favor. James tested the waters by suggesting a double date with Victor and his girlfriend. He spun it as a chance for Emily to unwind and make new friends. But Emily, ever cautious, hesitated. She had never felt comfortable around Victor, whose reputation preceded him. Politely but firmly, she declined, saying she preferred a quiet evening at home. Her refusal, though mild, struck a nerve with James. To him, it wasn't just a rejection of a simple outing, it was a sign that he was losing control over her. He tried to mask his frustration, but his true feelings betrayed him. The more he dwelled on it, the angrier he became. He was used to getting what he wanted, and Emily's resistance was a challenge he couldn't tolerate. In the days that followed, James grew colder and more irritable. Emily noticed his growing distance but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Little did she know that her decision to decline the date had set off a chain reaction that would soon lead to tragedy. James had made up his mind if she wouldn't cooperate, he would take matters into his own hands. It was a typical Friday evening when everything came crashing down. Emily had spent the day working on a new project for her business, eager to distract herself from the tension at home. She loved her work, finding solace in the structure and creativity it offered. By the time James walked through the door that night, she was curled up on the couch with a book, a cup of tea by her side. James entered the house with a stormy expression, his shoulders tense and his movements sharp. He had spent the day stewing over Emily's defiance, replaying the argument in his mind. To him, it wasn't just about the nightclub anymore, it was about control. He felt that Emily was slipping out of his grasp and he couldn't let that happen. Without so much as a greeting, he brought up the nightclub again, his tone clipped and accusatory. Emily looked up from her book, startled by the sudden outburst. She calmly explained her reasons once more, hoping to diffuse the situation. But her calmness only seemed to provoke him further. James began pacing the room, his voice rising with each step. He accused her of being selfish, of not supporting him, and of not understanding his needs. Emily, though hurt by his words, tried to stand her ground. She reminded him that she had the right to say no, that she wasn't comfortable with the idea. Her refusal was firm but gentle, her tone steady despite the storm brewing in front of her. But James wasn't listening. His anger had reached a boiling point, and reason had left him. In a moment of blinding rage, he grabbed a heavy crystal ornament from the mantelpiece. Before Emily could react, he swung it with all his strength, striking her on the side of the head. The sound of the impact was sickening, a sharp contrast to the silence that followed. Emily collapsed instantly, her body crumpling to the floor. James stood over her, breathing heavily, his mind racing. For a moment he felt nothing but shock. Then came the realization of what he had done. The woman who had trusted him, who had built a life with him, now lay lifeless at his feet. Panic set in, but James' survival instincts quickly took over. He knew he couldn't leave any evidence behind. He spent hours meticulously cleaning the scene, scrubbing every surface and disposing of any potential clues. He wrapped Emily's body in a blanket, his hands shaking as he worked. Under the cover of darkness, he loaded her into the trunk of his car and drove to a remote wooded area outside the city. There, in the stillness of the night, he dug a shallow grave. As he covered her with dirt, he felt a strange mix of fear and relief. He believed he had gotten away with it, that his carefully constructed plan would shield him from suspicion. But James didn't realize that his actions had set into motion a series of events that would ultimately unravel everything he had worked so hard to conceal. When Emily's friends and family couldn't reach her over the weekend, concern quickly turned into panic. Emily was a creature of habit, someone who always kept her loved ones informed of her plans. It wasn't like her to disappear without a word. Her best friend Lisa, who had always been protective of Emily, was the first to act. She called James repeatedly, but his responses were curt and vague. He claimed Emily had gone to visit an old friend out of town and would be back soon. Lisa wasn't convinced. By Monday, Lisa went to the police and filed a missing persons report. The detectives assigned to the case began their investigation with James. When they arrived at the couple's home, James played the role of the distraught husband flawlessly. He invited them in, offering coffee and recounting a detailed version of Emily's supposed plans. He claimed she'd left for a short getaway to clear her mind after an argument they'd had about their future. He even provided fake text messages he had sent to her phone, trying to establish an alibi. At first glance, James' story seemed plausible, but something about his demeanor raised suspicions. The detectives noted how he over-explained small details while brushing over important questions. His tears felt rehearsed, his emotions too controlled. They decided to dig deeper, starting with Emily's financial records and recent movements. What they found painted a troubling picture. Emily's bank account showed significant withdrawals in the months leading up to her disappearance, with funds transferred to joint accounts under James' control. Additionally, several expensive purchases were made, including luxury items and electronics. none of which Emily's friends recalled her mentioning. The detectives began to suspect that James was living well beyond his means, using Emily's wealth to fund a lavish lifestyle. The breakthrough came from a local gas station near a secluded wooded area on the city's outskirts. Reviewing the station's security footage, detectives spotted James' car driving through the area late on the night Emily disappeared. His explanation for being there, a fabricated story about scouting potential real estate properties, was flimsy at best. Simultaneously, interviews with Emily's friends and family painted a picture of a loving, generous woman who had grown increasingly distant in the months before her disappearance. They spoke of her concerns about James' behavior, his growing temper, and her suspicions about his honesty. One chilling detail stood out. Emily had confided in Lisa that she was starting to feel unsafe around James but wasn't sure how to confront him. When detectives questioned James again, his calm facade began to crack. They pressed him on inconsistencies in his story, and though he tried to maintain his composure, his answers became defensive and erratic. With mounting evidence, the police obtained a search warrant for the couple's home. Forensic analysis uncovered faint traces of blood on the carpet, hastily cleaned but not entirely erased. By now, James was the prime suspect, and the discovery of Emily's body in the shallow grave sealed his fate. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, James' lies unraveled, and the true extent of his deception began to surface. As detectives delved deeper into James' past, a disturbing pattern emerged. He wasn't the grieving husband he pretended to be. He was a seasoned predator with a dark and twisted history. Over the past decade, James had moved from city to city, changing his identity and leaving behind a trail of broken lives. Each stop on his journey revealed a similar story: a wealthy partner, a whirlwind romance, financial exploitation, and eventually, a mysterious disappearance. James' modus operandi was chillingly consistent. He targeted women who were independent but emotionally vulnerable, charming them into a sense of security before slowly isolating them. Once he gained control of their finances, he drained their resources and moved on, leaving no trace of his involvement. Authorities now believed Emily wasn't his first victim. She was simply the latest in a long line of women who had fallen prey to his schemes. The most horrifying revelation, however, came from James' connection to Victor, the nightclub owner. A deep dive into Victor's criminal network uncovered ties to human trafficking, with James acting as a recruiter of sorts. His plan for Emily had gone far beyond financial exploitation. He had intended to sell her to Victor, using her beauty as a bargaining chip to cement his standing in Victor's operation. Emily's resistance to the nightclub outing had unknowingly thwarted this plan, but it had also sealed her fate. The trial was a media frenzy, with every sordid detail of James' crimes laid bare for the world to see. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of a man who manipulated, exploited, and killed without remorse. Witnesses from James' past came forward, recounting eerily similar stories of deceit and betrayal. Each testimony strengthened the case against him, leaving little room for doubt. James, true to form, attempted to manipulate the courtroom. He presented himself as a victim of circumstance, claiming he acted out of desperation and not malice. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysis, financial records, and the testimony of Emily's friends and family created an airtight case. In the end, James was convicted on multiple charges, including first-degree murder, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, his once confident demeanor was replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had finally been unmasked. Emily's tragic death became a rallying cry for awareness about domestic manipulation and financial abuse. Her friends and family worked tirelessly to ensure her story was not forgotten, establishing a foundation in her name to support victims of similar crimes. James' downfall was a stark reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. While his crimes were monstrous, it was his arrogance and greed that ultimately led to his undoing. In the end, the man who thought he could outsmart everyone was brought to justice, leaving behind a legacy of pain and lessons learned too late.